Well, welcome everyone to today's Surf Club Facility Program information session. My name's Phil Wishart and I'll be facilitating the session and hopefully keeping the IT side of things on track. As we get started, I'd like to firstly acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're all meeting in this virtual environment today and pay my respects to Aboriginal elders past, present and emerging. It's great that you can join us today, and I'd like to introduce our Chief Executive at the Office of Sport, Karen Jones, who will be leading us through the session today. And thank you, Karen, for your time. I'd also like to acknowledge that we have Phil Ayres on the call from Surf Lifesaving New South Wales. So thank you for joining us, Phil, and we'll be hearing a little bit from Phil at the end of the presentation today. In terms of some housekeeping, a copy of this presentation will be made available in the coming days on the Surf Club Facility Program webpage. We'll also put up a recording of today's presentation, so don't feel like you need to scribble down notes furiously. And also, if you do have questions throughout the session, you're welcome to use the chat function and post in the chat. We won't address those questions today in the session, but what we will do is prepare a document for everyone that has clarifications on the questions asked today to make sure that everyone and all applicants have equal opportunity to see the responses to those and help put in high quality responses. If I can remind everyone, if you can just pop yourselves on mute and keep your cameras off throughout the session, that would be great. And without any further ado, I'll hand over to Karen for the presentation.
Thanks, Phil. Hi, everybody. Welcome this evening to our presentation. As you can see, we have an overview of the topics this presentation will cover, which we hope you'll find helpful when putting in an application. We'll also cover some questions that Phil Ayres, hi Phil, has sent through on behalf of the Surf Lifesaving Clubs. However, please also feel free to post any additional questions you may have in the chat as well. Now, let's start working through the program. Since 2017 and 2018, the New South Wales Government has committed $12 million to this program to assist clubs build and redevelop clubs across the New South Wales coast. $4 million is again available this year, and clubs can apply for grants from $30,000 up to $350,000. This year's program has a focus on universally designed and functional surf club facilities, and also removing barriers to access and sustainability, which we all know was very important last year with clubs providing refuge during the bushfires. Now for the all-important date, it is Wednesday the 3rd of March 2021 at 5 p.m, which is when the applications close. And just a heads up everybody, that's only 6 weeks away. Let's just move on now to the program objectives. Funding may be available for projects that support priorities outlined in this presentation and that address a community need and inclusive design. If you are unsure of where to find more information about the New South Wales Government priorities or inclusive design, you can visit the Office of Sport website or click the links in our program guidelines and they'll provide you with more information. Moving on to eligible applicants. So eligible applicants are surf lifesaving clubs in New South Wales. There are also Surf Lifesaving New South Wales branches, but please note that branches can apply for surf club related works, such as storage sheds for emergency equipment. However, they will only be considered if all applications from surf lifesaving clubs in the round receive funding. Over the life of this program, there's also been a $500,000 funding cap, and the Office of Sport has contacted the clubs who have reached the cap. However, if you have previously received funding and you're unsure if you are approaching the cap, then please don't hesitate to contact the Office of Sport through our grants unit. Let's now just move on to what some of the eligible project costs actually are. Examples of eligible project costs and types include the construction of new surf lifesaving club facilities and also capital enhancements of existing surf lifesaving club facilities. Priority will be given to surf club facilities identified as being in poor or unserviceable condition. Also those clubs that address a demonstrated need for the community, and also those clubs that have a high urgency to address facility building compliance requirements. Should your project be successful, and well done to those that would be successful, please note that projects should be completed within 24 months, that's 2 years, of the execution of the funding agreement. So the Office of Sport will sign a funding agreement with yourselves, and we expect that the project should be completed within 2 years of signing that agreement. In relation to ineligible project costs, our guidelines have all the info you'll need regarding ineligible projects. So please do refer to our guidelines before you start your application. I'd hate for you to go through the whole application process only to find that your proposal is ineligible. So please check out the list of ineligible project costs in our guidelines before starting your application. Now, some key considerations for your application and for your project. Now, there's some really important points on this slide. First of all, clubs must contribute 25% to the cost of the project. Now, that's known as a co-contribution. A co-contribution can be made up of club funds. It can be made up of voluntary labour. It can also be made up of a local government contribution. But, and I do emphasise this, it should not include supplier discounts. Other key points are that projects, as I said before, projects must be shovel ready and commence in 2021 and be completed within 2 years of signing the funding agreement. Let's now move on to the required documentation. Now, it is really important that you actually take time to prepare your application. As with infrastructure projects, we require you to upload and submit supporting documents that form part of the assessment of your application. If the supporting documentation isn't uploaded and submitted as part of your application, then the assessment panel cannot conduct an equitable assessment, and unfortunately, your application may not be assessed. So please ensure that you do include all of your supporting documentation as part of your application. Also, please ensure you provide a current DA and that all the documents outlined in the program guidelines are also included. Moving on to the application process. Again, I will remind you of the application closing date. It's the 3rd of March 2021, only 6 weeks away. So in preparation for the submission of your application, please check your eligibility, check that you're under the funding cap, and prepare and submit your application on the Office of Sport's Grants Online system. And the link to that system is on the grants webpage. Now we've just spent a bit of time talking about application requirements and the application process, but now let's talk about the assessment criteria and that process. So applications can only be assessed on what you have submitted. So make sure you address the criteria. Now pages 8 and 9 in our program guidelines have a lot of information about how the application will be assessed and how the response is weighted. So please, again, have a look at our program guidelines to make sure that you can address all of the criteria and information. Moving on to the timeline. As I've mentioned before, and I'm sounding a little bit like a parrot now, but as I've mentioned before, the program closes on the 3rd of March 2021 at 5 p.m. please make sure you have your application submitted by then. But there you can see all the timeline in terms of the assessment process, and again that all important date of the 3rd of March to kick that off. And then when we hope that we will have all the applications assessed and payments progressed should you be successful. Now let's move on to some questions. So it is now question time, and a big shout out and thank you to Phil, and that's Phil Ayres, for sending in some questions on behalf of the clubs. And we'll just go through some of those sort of generic questions now and acknowledge that there might be some further questions that you might have. And again, I encourage you to put those into the chat if you can. So our first question is, are clubs eligible if they have an unacquitted grant already? Now, the answer to this is yes. However, any clubs with outstanding financial acquittal or project reports should contact Surf Lifesaving New South Wales and also contact the Office of Sport Grants Unit. As we expect, and as applicants, you are expected to meet the requirements of any funding agreements that you may have already entered into. And just a reminder that eligible applications will be assessed against the program aims, focus, objectives and assessment criteria, and may also consider any acquittals as well. The next question is, can a supplier discount be considered as a co-contribution? I did call this out in a previous slide. The answer is no. It is not considered as an applicant contribution. I know we had a few applications last year that applied and included a supplier discount as part of their contribution. However, we did get some advice, and following that advice from an external probity advisor, it was deemed that this was not considered a contribution from the applicant. So I can't be any more explicit than saying that no, a supplier discount is not considered as an applicant co-contribution. However, local government funding can count towards your co-contribution. So please bear that in mind. Next question. Can the Office of Sport review my draft application? The Office of Sport staff, we can provide information that is already publicly available to potential applicants on, say, the interpretation of the guidelines, including what type of projects might be eligible for funding. We can also provide advice relating to the application process, and particularly the online process. But please note that the support that we can provide you is really limited to the information that is already publicly available. Next question, when do I need to provide a letter of support regarding the club's condition? And again, I reinforce that date. So any letter of support regarding your club's condition, it needs to be submitted as part of your application, and that is that it needs to be submitted by 5 p.m. on Wednesday the 3rd of March 2021. Please do remember that incomplete applications or applications that and or supporting documents submitted after the closing time and date may not be considered eligible. So it's really important that you have your completed application into us by 5 p.m. Wednesday the 3rd of March 2021. Next question, how will I know if my club is successful? You will be advised in writing, which will include the requirements to accept the grant, and will also ask you to enter into a funding agreement and complete a facility use schedule. So if you are successful, you will actually be notified in writing from the Office of Sport. Next, what if I receive funding for the same project from another government agency? That's a really common question that we do get asked. And grant funding from another New South Wales state government agency is not permitted as a co-contribution for the same component of a project. However, co-contributions made up from local and federal funding sources are permitted to be used for this purpose. And other New South Wales state government grant funding, that must be used for a different component of the project. So you can't use any existing New South Wales state government funding that you might have already received as a co-contribution if it is for the same component of the project that you are proposing as part of this application. Next one, do I need to complete a facility use schedule as part of my application? The answer there is no. Only successful applicants will be required to complete one. Look, I want to acknowledge that this has been a new process, particularly for the 2019 and 2020 successful applicants. And I would personally like to thank them for working with us through the new process and documentation. And we are proposing to roll over the requirement for facility use schedule for those successful projects under this program for this year. And finally, it's just really important to remind everybody that if you do have any more questions, you please check our guidelines in the first instance. Alternatively, you can call or email us for any support. Thank you for your time this evening. I wish you all the very best for your application, and I look forward to having a look through them all. Phil, I'll now hand back to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. I will now hand over to Phil Ayres from Surf Lifesaving New South Wales to say a few words on behalf of the organisation.
Thanks, Phil, and thanks, Karen, for going through the process for this year, and also for those of you who have attended to get some more information on the program. As most people will be aware, this is a really significant and important grant program for our clubs. It's provided, and I should know the answer to this, but I think it's well over $20 million in more recent years, at $4 million a year for the past 4 or so years that go out directly out to our clubs. So there have been some tremendous projects, large and small, that this has funded. I look at clubs like the Woolgoolga Surf Club that's been completely rebuilt, and this program was a significant contributor to that, along with funding from other agencies. Down to smaller projects as simple as solar, and we talked about that today, or refurbishment of change rooms, bringing up to spec change rooms for equivalency between men and women in the club and visitors, all really key projects. So I'd encourage you to think deeply about what the needs are at your club. Look at how this program can help you come along with that and generate the funding needed so that you can complete those projects. The Surf Life Saving grants unit is certainly available to assist you with applications for the grants. So I'd encourage you to get in contact with them, and if you need contact details, if you just contact me at the office, and I can give you those, and that's a tremendous help in preparing for your different applications. And again, finally, thank you to Karen and the staff of the Office of Sport for firstly the presentation tonight, but also more broadly the availability of the funding that's so important for us at Surf Life Saving. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phil. So that concludes today's session. We appreciate that's a lot of information to take in. As we said, we will be publishing a copy of this presentation and also a copy of the video from today's session on the Surf Club Facility Program website. If you do have questions, and I can't see any that are in the chat at the moment, feel free to send them through to the grants unit over the next 24 hours if you think of something, and we will provide a clarifications document which will go on that webpage as well. That will be updated throughout the grants application process as questions come in to ensure that all applicants have the same level of information. So once again, thank you to Karen for your time this evening, and thank you to Phil. Thank you to all of you who've logged on, and we wish you the best of luck with your applications.